Hi folks, HR Funk here. If you tuned in to last Saturday's video, you know that in that video I was taking a look at the 9mm cartridge, and specifically I was trying to see what type of bullet velocity I could achieve while firing that cartridge through firearms with different barrel lengths. And I had several handguns with me in that video. I also had my 9-inch barreled Mac 5 and I had my carbine length Kel-Tec Sub 2000. And I said at the end of that video to let me know if you enjoyed that content because I could produce more of it with different cartridges. And not only did a lot of you view that video, but a lot of you commented on it and requested more similar comparisons. And by far the cartridge that was most requested was the 357 Magnum cartridge, which was fine with me. I am a lifelong fan of the 357 Magnum cartridge, and that's one I wanted to take a look at with a comparison like this myself. So in this video, we're again going to be looking at bullet velocities that are achievable in firearms with different barrel lengths. But this time around, I'm going to be using a Hornady factory, I think it's American Gunner, 125 grain 357 Magnum. And we're going to start out with the shortest barrel length being 2.5 inches, and we're going to go all the way up to a carbine length barrel in 16 inches. And this is going to be fun. So I'm also going to be showing you the accuracy this time around. A lot of you were very interested in the accuracy, even though the last time I said that's really just for informational purposes. And the accuracy you're seeing is just what I was able to achieve on a given day with a given firearm under the conditions I was shooting in. But a lot of you found that to be very interesting. So this time around, I'm going to set up both cameras so you have the split screen view in the video and you'll be able to see me shooting. You'll be able to see the shots impacting the target. So with that intro out of the way, let's get to it and take a look at the firearms I'm going to be using for today's video. I'm going to kick things off with a trio of combat magnums. These three revolvers are all very similar, but they have some distinct differences that I thought would be fun to explore during the course of this video. First up is going to be my 2.5-inch Model 19 that you see here. This revolver is exactly as it was when it left the Smith & Wesson factory, and this was manufactured in the early 1980s. As you can see, it is not pinned and recessed, so that indicates it was probably manufactured after about 1981 or so. But it is a very fine rendition of the 2.5-inch Combat Magnum. I like this revolver a lot, and as I said, it's going to be first up when we start to test velocities. I'm going to follow it with a more modern rendition of the same revolver. This is a Model 19 Carry Comp, which is essentially the exact same revolver, although with a matte finish as you see here, and it has an integral compensator in the barrel as you can see here, hence the name Carry Comp. Interestingly, the rifled portion of this barrel is exactly the same length as it is in my 2.5-inch Model 19, but the remaining half-inch of barrel is taken up with an expansion chamber and the integral compensator. So it's going to be fun to see whether the velocity drops off as a result of the compensator, if it stays the same, or if it increases. We'll see what happens. After that, I'm going to move on to my 3-inch Model 66. This again is a Combat Magnum. It is very similar to the two that I just showed you, but this has a 3-inch barrel, and I did have some light customizing done to this revolver. And as part of that customizing, I had it Magna ported, and you can see the ports right there. So this is going to be fun because we've got 3 different barrel lengths here. If I can get the focus to readjust, I'm not sure what's going on there. We've got 2.5, 3-inch with a compensator, and then 3-inch with Magna ports. With the Model 66, the rifling does go all the way to the end of the barrel, but it has the ports. So we'll be able to see what happens with velocity with all 3 of these when I fire them with that Hornady 125 grain 357 Magnum ammo. After the Combat Magnums, I'll move on to a Distinguished Combat Magnum, in this case a 4-inch Model 686. So we'll be able to see what type of velocity we can achieve in the 4-inch tube. Then the only non-Smith & Wesson revolver in the group, this is my Cimarron Model P with a 5.5-inch barrel. And the last handgun of the group is going to be my 6-inch Model 28. And I'll wrap things up with my Marlin Model 1894 CP with a 16-inch barrel. As I mentioned, the ammunition for today's test is Hornady American Gunner. This is 125 grain 357 Magnum ammunition, and you can see it has a rated velocity from Hornady of 1,500 feet per second, but I don't know what barrel length Hornady used to test this ammunition, so we'll see which one of these firearms that I have available today is going to come closest to that, and we'll see if any of these actually exceed Hornady's rating of 1,500 feet per second. So with the groundwork all out of the way, let's get right to the testing. First up, as I said, is my 2.5-inch stock factory Model 19 Combat Magnum. Here's how it did. I decided to do the group analysis this way, and with that 2.5-inch Model 19, I started things off with a nicely centered group that measures 2 7/8 inches from center to center of the two farthest holes, and overall firing from 25 yards with iron sights. I was pretty happy with this group. When we go to the 3-inch Model 19 Carry Comp with its integral compensator, let's see what happened with it. The group opened up a bit with the Model 19 Carry Comp. This comes in at just under 4 inches. It's 3 7/8 inches from center to center of the two farthest shot holes. Although I think if I was using a different target with a more well-defined aiming point, I could probably shrank these groups a bit and also probably kept them a little bit more well-centered. My original plan was to use the numerals on the target as aiming points, but from 25 yards, I was not able to see them. Still, from 25 yards with a 3-inch barrel and the relatively short sight radius, I'm not too worried about this. And also, I didn't take any time to try to dial in the revolvers for this specific load. So it could be too, if I had just taken time to make a sight correction, I could have fired a more well-centered group at least, if not a tighter one. On we go to the 3-inch Model 66 with its Magnum-ported barrel. Let's find out how it did. So if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm putting two 3-shot groups on each of these targets. The first 3-shot group, I'm aiming at the upper chest region. The second 3-shot group, I'm aiming at the lower abdomen. And as I said, I really don't have a clear aiming point on these targets, so I'm trying to hold the sights as well centered as I can and squeeze off the best 3 shots that I can. So again, there would be a little bit better accuracy, I'm sure, if I was using a different target. Even so, this time around, the Model 66 printed a group that was 2 1/4 inches from center to center, and I was pretty happy with that. It's a little off to the right, but as I said, I didn't try to zero the revolver sights to this ammunition, and that might have made a difference as well. Next is the 4-inch Model 686. This is the first duty-size firearm we have in the group. Let's see what happened. The 4-inch Model 686 turned in a very nice sub 2-inch group. In fact, this 3-shot group measures 1 7/8 inches center to center from the two farthest holes. And that has always been a very good shooting revolver. It is very accurate, and here it demonstrated once again that it still is. Now we get to do a little Old West style 6 gunning with the Model P from Cimarron and its 5.5-inch barrel. Let's find out what happened. The 25-yard group with the Cimarron Model P measured 3¼ inches center to center, which is a little bigger than we saw with some of the Smith & Wesson revolvers, but even so, I was pretty happy with this. A lot of times I don't shoot this revolver real well. I don't think my eyes work real well with the old style sights that are on there, and I was starting to think I just hadn't found a good load for it yet, but from 25 yards posting a group like this, I was not at all upset with the performance that I got from the Model P this time around. Last of the handguns is a classic, my Model 28. This is a vintage 1966 manufactured Model 28 with its 6-inch barrel. Let's see how it did. I feel like I let the Model 28 down a little bit on this group. It ended up being 2¾ inches, and I know that revolver will shoot better than that. With that nice long sight radius from the 6-inch barrel, it's capable of very fine accuracy, and I just didn't demonstrate it this time. Even so, 2¾ inches with iron sights from 25 yards is nothing to cry about. It's just not as well as that revolver will shoot. And finally, let's see what happens when we run this 125 grain Hornady 357 Magnum load through the 16-inch barrel of my Marlin 1894. The final group of the day comes to us courtesy of the Marlin 1894, and it's a good one. This group measures 2¼ inches center to center. And once again, I was just trying to keep the bead front sight of the 1894 centered in the head of this target, and that worked out pretty well this time around because I finished up with a pretty decent group. Folks, a quick word about the group sizes you saw flashing up on the screen. I had someone ask me after last week's video if I was measuring these somehow differently or why it was that the groups looked so much bigger in the photographs or on screen as I was showing them than they typically do when he measures them. And the only thing I can say is it has something to do with the way groups look on camera. I can remember reading back years ago in magazine articles where the author would be talking about how when they photographed the groups that he had fired on the target, they appeared to be larger than when they actually measured them. And it's the same case with the groups that I'm firing here. The one that I'm showing you from the Marlin Model 1894, this is a 2¼ inch group, so nice group, measured center to center with my elementary school ruler. But when you look at those, it just looks bigger. I don't know why, but I guarantee you that if you measure this or if you measure any of the groups that I showed you that were flashing up on the screen, you would see the exact same measurements center to center that I got when I measured them. So that's it. Just wanted to make sure I touched on the group sizes and the way they look when you see them on screen. All right, folks, time to crunch the numbers now and see what we might be able to learn from all of this data. And I'm going to put the chart up on the screen so all of you can follow along as I read my way through here. And starting things off with the 2½ inch Model 19, it had an average for 3 shots of 1,228 feet per second, which translates to 419 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And I thought that was pretty impressive right off the bat. With just that short barrel, we had very good velocity and very good energy numbers, and I think that would be a very good defensive load. It's not achieving the velocity level that we'll see later on with the longer barrels, but for any sort of defensive use at any sort of reasonable defensive ranges, I think that's going to be just fine. Moving down to the 3-inch Model 19 carry comp with its integral compensator, we actually lost a little bit of velocity. We lost 13 feet per second from the 2½ inch barrel Model 19 to the carry comp, which truthfully is insignificant. That's only a difference of 1% that we're losing in velocity from the standard Model 19 to the carry comp with its compensator, but we gain some controllability because of that compensator. And moving down to the 3-inch Model 19, again, we see a velocity decrease of 10 feet per second from the velocity we got with the carry comp. It had an average for 3 shots of 1,205 feet per second, which is less than 1% difference from the carry comp above it. But truthfully, all 3 of these combat Magnum revolvers are so close in terms of their velocity. There's only 23 feet per second difference through the entire range of those revolvers. And that is so close that I think if I went back out and shot them again, because of the deviation from shot to shot, we could definitely see them reverse positions or change positions in the chart. And I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. Basically anywhere from 2.5 to 3 inches with the compensators, with the porting or whatever, we're getting between 1,200 and 1,230 feet per second. And again, I think that is very good for defensive purposes at any kind of reasonable defensive distances. Moving down to the Model 686 with its 4-inch barrel, now we see a definite velocity boost. The velocity is actually increasing 110 feet per second over and above what we saw with the 3-inch Model 66. It had an average velocity for 3 shots of 1,315 feet per second for 480 foot-pounds of energy. Again, that's doing very well. Now, we are not achieving Hornady's stated velocity of 1,500 feet per second yet, but again, I think that's going to be very good for defensive use. That is a 9% increase in velocity over and above what we saw with the 3-inch Model 66. And if you go over to the next line in the chart, where we look at the percentage of velocity increase over and above the first reading we got with the 2.5-inch Model 19, that is also coming up 9% from that reading. And the reason these are all the same over here is because when you carry these out into further and further decimal points, the percentages change minutely, but up to the point that we got to the 4-inch, the differences remain consistent. Moving on to the 5.5-inch Cimarron Model P, we see the velocity achieved was an average of 1,412 feet per second. So we've broken 1,400 feet per second here for a muzzle energy of 554 foot-pounds. Again, very, very good energy that we're seeing. And with the 6-inch Model 28, now we are up to 1,496 feet per second. So basically we are achieving Hornady's stated velocity there. It's only coming in on average of 4 feet per second less than that. And if I fired another few rounds, it might actually make it up to the average depending upon what the velocity readings of those rounds might be. The energy rating is 621 foot-pounds. Again, this is serious muzzle energy. We're basically up to hunting type energies now. If you're going to use this at relatively close range for something up to the size of deer, I think it would work pretty well. Although the 125 grain bullet might be a little light for that. When I hunt with a 357 Magnum, I usually bump it up to the 158 grain loads. Even so, I think that is very good energy coming from any sort of handgun. And again, this is part of the reason I am such a fan of the 357 Magnum. Finally, let's take a look at the Marlin 1894 with its 16-inch barrel. And now that 125 grain bullet is traveling over 2,000 feet per second. In fact, it averaged 2,001 FPS for a kinetic energy rating of 1,111 foot-pounds. Again, we are looking at serious energy right here. This is a 505 FPS increase over and above what we saw with the Model 28. That gives us a 34% increase in velocity. And when we compare that to the original velocity we saw with the 2.5-inch Model 19, that's an increase of 773 feet per second, or 63% increase in velocity. That is tremendous, and that gives you an idea with that slower burning powder used in the 357 Magnum casings, how much extra energy it gets when it has more time to burn in the longer barrels. So there you go, folks. That's the results of my test with firearms, in this case mostly revolvers with different barrel lengths, and then closing things out with the 16-inch barrel of my carbine. If you enjoyed this, let me know. I can do more of this type of thing. I can use maybe more 357s with different bullet weights. I can use other cartridges. Just let me know what you'd like to see, because this is kind of fun to do. In any case, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com. Take a look at the news and information page to see all the latest things that are going on with me and the channel. And also go by the products page. You can see a lot of the products there that I have reviewed, next to links to the manufacturer's sites, and there's information below those links that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks, and until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.